Hey everyone, and welcome to what is appropriately the last review, recap, and reaction to The Last of Us Season 2. We started off with a double episode recap, and we are going to end with a double episode recap. This time, recapping episodes 6 and 7. Episode 6, The Price, is a flashback episode. This was really great. Well, let me just say that one of the things that I personally love about The Last of Us HBO Max show is that as a fan of the video game, I'm rarely surprised with some of the stuff I'm seeing in the plot for this season. So seeing stuff that wasn't in the game is especially entertaining for me. This especially goes back to season 1 with episode 3, the infamous episode 3. But also just anything that has to do with the past. So this episode, The Price, delves into Joel and Tommy's childhood and their interactions with each other and also with their father in this particular scene. I thought this was a great way to start off the episode because it's all flashbacks, but also frames an important part of Joel's life and also bookends a specific saying that comes from Joel's father saying, "I hope you'll do better than me," and ends with Joel saying that to Ellie, which I'll highlight later on why that is so important. We then get a series of flashbacks that are hinted at in the games. We don't actually get to see a lot of them. We do get to see one in particular, but there are a few scenes regarding the getting the tattoo, dating in Jackson for Ellie, and sort of what happens after the New Year's party. One flashback scene in particular that was great to see is actually in the game, and that was the one at the museum. So Joel does whatever he can to make sure that Ellie feels cared for in this world. And one thing that she does love is the idea of being an astronaut, or the fact that humans were able to leave the planet in some form. And to see Ellie get this gift in the game was a special experience, and to see it again in this show was equally special. Yeah, I just love the interactions here. One thing in the game which was highlighted, which was not highlighted in the show, is the fact that we learn that Ellie has learned to swim since season 1. So that was a major story plot point that we kind of had to get around if we were going to be controlling Ellie through most of the game. So this flashback at the museum did highlight, that Ellie has learned to swim. I think Joel pushes her in as a kind of a prank, and then you learn to swim your way out. But that was not in the show. We do get other flashbacks to other birthdays. The very first Jackson birthday for Ellie and Joel, where the guitar is gifted, and you'll see that's the important gift or idea to Ellie. The significance of that gift. So that's another important plot point. Let's see. I think what really comes across is that we know that Joel is not a perfect person, and no one is in this universe. He really does sacrifice himself for those he loves, and is unwilling to sacrifice those he loves for anyone else, which we saw at the end of season 1. So Those are going to be very important. At the end of the episode, Joel explains to Ellie why he did what he did. One thing that is kind of controversial is that Joel almost with certainty says that the cure would have worked, that Ellie's sacrifice would have created a cure. We weren't told that in the game. Marlene says there's no guarantee that it'll work, but it was worth the risk to sacrifice Ellie for that. I think in Joel's mind, maybe he believed that Marlene also cared so much for Ellie and their backstory that, yeah, she probably did her research and double checked, and there was a high likelihood that the cure would have worked, but it's not guaranteed. Nothing is in this world anyway. So maybe that is why Joel thinks that it's as certain as it possibly could be and says that or conveys that to Ellie. But again, once the cure is made, there's no infrastructure there to spread the cure to everyone, or there's no guarantee that the Fireflies would use it in a benevolent way, right? It could be used as a bargaining chip for power or something like that. And Joel's smart. He probably knows that those are options and probably calculated that as well. So it was interesting to have that conversation in this season, because in the game, that conversation happens at the very end. But in the HBO Max podcast, Neil Druckmann explains to have that conversation come at that point in the game, if it were to come at the end of season 3 or maybe even 4, then that, the audience would have to wait years to get that conversation in that context. So I can understand that change. So that was a great flashback episode, in my opinion, which leads us right into Ellie returning to the theater. We don't know how she gets out of the second basement of the hospital, how she eludes all the people there at the hospital that now is aware that someone is there. It just kind of cuts back to the theater, assuming that she gets out. So in this part of the episode, we see Jesse and Dina kind of back together. He's going to get the arrow out. She refuses to drink alcohol, which is Jesse points out that that's unusual for her, especially in the state that she is in, where alcohol could be used as a painkiller of sorts. And he kind of gets clued in on what is actually really happening there between Dina and Ellie, and what's happening with Dina as well. So he's a very intelligent guy, and I think very pragmatic, and is very aware of his surroundings, which we will see later in the episode. Ellie, does confess to Dina that she knew the reason why Joel was killed, why Abby was on her own revenge quest, and I don't believe that's in the game at all. So that's kind of interesting and new, and you can see Dina wants to end the revenge quest after being so supportive of it in the previous episodes. And Ellie also seems to be resigned and just okay with giving up the quest as well, with the new baby and having been found by Jesse, and Dina's injured. So that was an interesting new dynamic. At this particular point, Tommy does not return, so Jesse and Ellie need to go search for Tommy, which makes sense. They must have had a plan on where they would potentially rendezvous to, so I do believe that it would make sense for Ellie to support and for Jesse to lead the way. But this also leads to some interesting interactions. We get to see conversations and different thought processes about what it means to be in a community, who's in the community, what do people do for their community. These are all very difficult conversations to have. One thing that we do know, though, is that Ellie is very reactionary and can fly off the handle. She admits to doing that in, I believe, episode 2. And so we have seen that multiple times throughout this season already, and in my opinion makes the character look kind of unlikable, which makes sense if you know what's going to happen in season 3. So I don't want to talk too much about that, but yeah, there's definitely a case to be made about how unlikable Ellie is in this particular moment, as well as we'll see, how unlikable or likable maybe Abby is in season 3. But we follow Ellie and Jesse, and they get to a point where we hear sniper gunfire in the distance, and Jesse says, "That's definitely Tommy." And Ellie talks herself, I think she knows that it's also Tommy, but talks herself out of believing that it's Tommy because she sees what could potentially be the location of Abby in the distance. She sees this Ferris wheel and a whale on the aquarium. Those were the 2 words that Nora mentioned in her last, I guess, minutes in the basement. So Ellie's now, when she was earlier resigned to going back, now kind of has this bloodlust yet again. It's just kind of, the target is in sight. Might as well go and try this, get Abby this one last time before we go back. This is her last chance, basically. So she talks herself out of going to support Jesse, which is, kind of this terrible thing because we know Jesse's doing everything he can for the community, so he sees Ellie as part of the community, but she does not reciprocate in this particular sense. She wants to get revenge for someone who is already passed, and admittedly in a very terrible way, but she has this bloodlust. So again, as mentioned in season 1, Ellie does not know how to swim. So it must be, Ellie must have such willpower and anger to be fueling her to get on a boat with this oncoming storm. And we get to see that, Ellie almost drowns. She gets picked up. And this is also a new scene that wasn't in the game, where Ellie almost gets hung and her guts spilled out onto the ground. That doesn't happen. There's a horn that blares at just the right moment, saving her. And we'll find out what's happening there in season 3 between the scars and the wolves. So after almost dying, getting to that beach, and then again almost dying after being caught by the scars, the first thing she does is get back on the boat and into the water to head to the aquarium. So she's really determined. We get to the aquarium and we see Mel and Owen there in a very similar way that we would in the game. However, things play out a little bit differently, and I'll just say that the performance the actress gave, the actress who plays Mel gave, was, I think, particularly moving and kind of echoes the feelings of Dina and even maybe Joel in the past towards Ellie. So um, I thought it was particularly moving for us to see that, and then also for Ellie as a character to see that moment. And Tommy comes in with Jesse and drags Ellie back out, and they get back to the theater and they're planning their way back to Jackson. And so at this particular moment, Jesse has a chance to kind of talk things over with Ellie, reconcile just a little bit, and then they hear some noises coming from the lobby. They run out, and bam, Jesse's gone. He was, I think, a great actor. We got to see Jesse a little bit more in the show than I feel we did in the game. So yeah, I'm really gonna miss him as a character, but I kind of having played the game, I kind of expected that this was going to happen. Then we see that Abby was there in the lobby. She points the gun at Ellie, and with the bang, cuts to black, and we see Abby wake up, and it's day one all over again. So when they were in the theater, I think that was at the end of day 3. So we will see in the next season everything that's happening at the same time from Abby's perspective. And it's really interesting because we will get to learn even more about the Scars and the Wolves. That whole war, hopefully learn a lot more about the Prophet. We'll get to understand how relationships cause us to do the best things for each other and the worst things for each other. I would say overall in this season, because it's not completely done yet, I would probably give it an 8 out of 10. There are some elements that were added to the show that I really enjoyed. There are also elements that were kind of shuffled around or removed that were a little bit jarring for me, having played the games. And it did feel a little bit rushed. The hospital section in particular, that was a big one for me, at least. And I think the Seraphite interactions with Ellie was also cut short. So hopefully we'll get to see a little bit more of that in the next season, but that's a few years away. So yeah, it's been a great season so far, but we're not at the end just yet. So I will see you in 2 years. All right. Thanks everyone. Bye.